On October 29th, my grandpa, the fabulous Frank Rubber, shook me awake from a sleep so deep it was turning my bones to diamonds, which was weird because he was dead. You're listening to episode 15 of Pulp, surreal stories from a nearby skull, an audio zine broadcasting stories that'll leave ink in your ears. The following tale is intended for mature audiences only. I watched it happen. I was there for his penultimate and ultimate words. He said, "And now, for my last trick," and then, "Oh God, ow, ow, ow! Actually, this is no time for jokes." I am his last living relative. I know that for a fact, because a meteor strike killed off my entire bloodline whilst I was out of state on a school trip. I stayed with him after that, until whatever took him at the ripened age of 112 years old. I saw the light leave his eyes. I watched the EKG monitor flatline, and yet at 3 in the morning, he apparated by my bedside wrapped in a gingham hospital gown, with his semi-opaque and ancient asshole flapping about in his wake. He told me to get my lazy, stinky ass up, said we gotta leave Salome, Arizona, where I live now, and head for the Mojave Desert. He looked exactly as he had right before he popped his clogs. Thin, and old, and angry. He didn't have any legs though. He had a weird, wriggly little tail of energy instead. Also, as per his last request, he was wearing his 10-inch classic stage magician's top hat. As fate would have it though, that was not his last request. This was. There was a race going on in the Mojave, run by some goon named the Ghostking of Speed. If we came in first place, then we would get one wish to share between us. He didn't say what kind of race it would be, or how long it would take. He said. Grandpa Frank did tell me, whilst crossing his heart, that if I brought him back to life with the wish, then he would teach me how to do magic. He assured me, unable to pinky swear, that he was no parlor trickster. He called himself a warlock, and he was not the only one. In fact, every competitor in the Ghost King's race would be partnered with a dead warlock. In fact, he went as far to say that he was a single feather in a down pillow that had sold its soul to the Devil King of Hell. In his teenage years, he and the other feathers had promised their immortal ghosts to a god of sorts, and, in return, received the ability to conjure illusions and evoke the elements. For some unknown reason, now, Grandpa was trapped on Earth halfway gone, totally unable to pass on to the other world. He considered it a bit of an unexpected boon, of course. Stuck in a purgatory state was miles better than eternal damnation at the hands of the Devil King, but at the same time, you can't pull endless handkerchiefs out of your sleeve if your grabby little hands are intangible. So I figured he made a good enough point. I agreed to drive him down there at the very least, because I am all that he has left. And also, I couldn't think of another way to get rid of him. I didn't want to be haunted by a 100-plus-year-old man, even if he did do me a solid after my family was wiped clean off the map. I mean, honestly, some of his opinions are extremely outdated. I don't have a car though. I ride a moped, which I rent from my boss in order to deliver pizzas for him because the whole world is mental. And it's speed locked at a solid 40 miles an hour because it's a moped, baby's first bike. I figured I had nothing to lose. I mean, I couldn't win on this damn thing, could I? And anyway, how long could a race really last? Grandpa Frank packed his lime green, semi-impalpable visage into the box compartment beneath my seat, and I told my boss I'd been in a life-threatening accident. I couldn't think of any other reason why I couldn't be in work, to be honest. Delivery drivers don't get sick days. Not in Salome. I took off quick sticks before the sun could rise, and, I guess, before I could be fired on the sly and have the bike taken back. I'd never made a trip longer than 2 hours on this thing, mostly because it has no front-facing lights, just a wind-up torch that I'd sellotaped to the handlebars. It had no radio, so I only had the muffled groans of my deceased dad's deceased dad to keep me company. It got pretty lonely on the open road, until I got on the 95. My God, I have never, in all of my life, seen so many goddamn weirdos on the road. taking up all the room on the route. Even on the opposing side of the road, there were men on horseback, cars powered by jet engines, an electric egg, as well as a tank with not one, not three, but 5 turrets, all firing soap bubbles into the hot air for no other reason than to scare the previously mentioned horses, I guess. I saw a school bus with 2 fronts and 2 drivers, which fought for room on the tarmac whilst driving horizontally. There was a biplane that was hovering just above roof level, a canopysaurus, a truckosaurus, a skateboarder that looked famous but probably wasn't, a wienermobile, a hamster wheel, a flying floral bedspread, what appeared to be a traditional dish-shaped UFO, 3 bumper cars whose drivers did not know each other but were pretty excited about the coincidence, as well as John Lennon's Rolls Royce, a monkey bike, a love bug, the talking zebra from the movie Racing Stripes, and of all things, a Chrysler PT Cruiser. Believe me, it was a regular convoy of creeps, a fossil-fueled soapbox derby, a real wacky races situation, only instead of having a laughing dog or a bear in the passenger seat, everybody had a weird green spirit of their own, most of which had a silly hat on. As a group, we were careering towards the same destination with little to no context, a place called Trash City, said Grandpa Frank. It wasn't far off the size, either. We could see it on the horizon for miles as we were rolling up to it, encapsulated by a disheveled brick wall. Fit with gargoyles and crenelles was a whole world's worth of architecture. It all jutted out of the dunes, as if time had broken and out had burst pieces of the Middle Ages, the 20th century, and a distant, apocalyptic future. Shattered skyscrapers, gunmetal grey cuboids, and rust-bitten Ferris wheels had all been strewn up with fairy lights and bunting, both sans any collar whatsoever. A Freightliner ran the width and length of the place along a roller coaster track, making it appear more like a trash theme park than a trash city. Trash was apt though, no better word for it honestly. As we were parading into the pay and display parking lot outside, I was sucker punched by a sheer stench comparable only to that New York garbage island. It hummed of rancid spam, tetanus, and wet graveyard. I had to parallel park with one hand, up against a snowmobile and a speedboat, because I was holding my goddamn nose closed. I pulled my grandpa out from beneath the seat, and we all walked together towards the entrance arc, above which an old circus light bulb sign spelling out Trash City hung on steel cables. A welcome wagon rolled out from beneath it as we strolled across the lot, which itself was bigger than my hometown, but smaller than the crater that now sits in its place. It was folks on roller skates that greeted us, all wearing mauve sheets like camp Halloween ghosties, with felt-tip eyes drawn on, and extraordinarily hairy legs that implied total nudity lay beneath. Like a barbershop quartet times 10, they rang out a hello, 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 as we entered the venue through a textureless turnstile. Stirless sand made up the pathway beneath my feet, but it had lost all colour since passing through the threshold. It was impossible to tell how deep it went. In some parts, evidence lurked beneath of some brickstone bollards and swallowed lengths of skyscrapers, but elsewhere there was the suggestion of a curbside and golden clay tiles peeking out beneath the ash-white dunes. Apart from the costumed goons on the Ghost King's payroll and the cavalcade of confusion in which I played a part, there was no life here, not so much as a bird circling above or a bug crawling at my feet. Ahead of the entrance lay 6 sign-in booths, each occupied by some semi-transparent demon-looking dude. The one I got had 4 cross-on-like horns, curling out of the back of his head like tendrils, and he was all business in his polo neck. He wanted my name, and my ghost's name, and our relationship, as well as what we'd be riding for the duration of the race, and whether or not we had any kind of special skills that might help us on the way. I asked for an example, and he told me about a woman and her dead wife who would be racing in a tuk-tuk that could stop time for approximately 0.9 of a second, which seemed both extremely unfair and ultimately pointless. But he assured me that it wasn't against any kind of rule. In fact, it was recommended. I looked to my grandpa, and he shook his head, so I shook mine. Again, I watch our chances of winning slip lower and lower. With crab claws instead of hands, He gave me a contract thicker than a pulp novel. Then, as if I can multitask, he started reading off a list of rules from memory. I started flicking through it, even though it was written in some diabolical language that I do not speak, because it was the only thing that I could do to stop myself from staring at his big red snippers. I swear to whatever God is real that I heard him say 3 sets of 6 stages, as if this race spanned all 51 states. He carried on, something, no rules, which I didn't like, and he reiterated the prize which, at the very least, my grandpa had not lied about. He said, 1 wish, any wish, no wish-strictions, and then he laughed, which I definitely didn't like. In the end, I just signed the damn thing to get it out of the way. In retrospect, I shouldn't have done that. I should have just taken my bike and left my grandpa and enjoyed the only sick day I've taken since my whole family died in that fiery explosion. Instead, I just printed my thumb on the line dotted with skulls and moved on into the big city itself, where the funfair theme continued, and then some. According to the demon, a big party was going to take place right after an announcement from the Ghostking of Speed himself, so we weaseled ourselves together amidst miniature circus tents, stacks of unplugged CRT televisions, and swarms of more roller skate ghosties who had seemingly no trouble navigating from sand to tile. To take my mind off the nightmare, and to take my eyes off their bare legs, I started fiddling with the TV sets, prodding button after button, until one of them started whirring and barfing out an endless supply of snail shells from its VHS slot, as though I had won some kind of escargot jackpot. Eventually, I had to stuff my sweater into the slit to stop them from coming out, because it just would not stop, as all the other competitors started to funnel into the square, looking at me all strange like this was our special skill. We watched as the skaters took up their marks. A handful entered the assorted tents, never to return, and the rest of them parked themselves between the racers and stared into empty space in amicable quiet, totally non-respondent to any queries or quibbles. Once all motion settled into a constant, bare sway, a drum roll erupted from beneath their lilac cloaks. What caused it, I could only imagine. As the roll reached its climax, all of the televisions flicked on. First, to an unestablished black and white static, like a viscous collective of dandruff ants. Then, to a sepia-toned image of another sheet ghost. This one had on an unconvincing, tousled black wig atop his dressing, and a bejeweled golden crown on top of that. His sheet lacked the vibrance of the mauve coloring, and in place of the scrawled facial features, there were punched holes and frayed edges, but the standard definition picture obscured whatever was beneath it. He spoke in a voice that sounded as though it had been first recorded in reverse, and then fixed in post-production.
"Folks, friends, and foes," it began. "I thank you for assembling on such short notice for what I believe to be the race of a lifetime. Literally, in some cases, I imagine, for I am offering a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity to rescind the penalty of death, if that be what you desire most of all."
Handheld cue cards shuffled in from the bottom of the frame as he worked his way through the first couple, cleared his throat, and then tossed them behind him.
"It's stiff,"
he said to somebody off screen.
Fire all of my speech riders and have them brought back here. To hell. I mean, not one joke."
Whoever was answering his demands agreed in haste and scurried off, at which point confetti cannons burst and rained colourless paper shreddings down upon us.
Now the timing's off,"
said the ghost.
"Anyway, if you couldn't tell, I am the Ghost King of Speed, the Saint Eater, the champion of the Trickster's Crack, and the current sovereign of the underworld. If you're in my wheelhouse, you'll know that I grand slammed that jacked up Devil King in ritual combat, like Balboa. Bam, bam!"
And with that, he shot out a combo of 2 punches from beneath his sheet, which seemed to extend on forever, giving no glimpse of what may be beneath it.
But after I lapped 2, I said 2 different gods. I've gotten all bored being down here in the Underdesert. I figured, why not see what you slicks have got to offer, huh? I took the old devil's little black book and sent out an invite to every dead warlock I could find. And why not? else are you doing besides just hovering about, huh?
A cheer erupted amongst the spirits in session. Everybody was excited, except me.
I asked myself, what would be most appropriate? And being that I won my own title with a hairpin around the goddamn world, I figured a quick flag-to-flag on NASCAR soil would be plenty interesting. 18 stages, beginning with my very own home away from home, Trash City, and leading...
He paused, and you could hear the grin forming beneath his sheet, which I seriously did not like.
Well, you'll find out soon enough, won't you?
Jeez, even his laugh sounded like an engine. Kinda sounded like he didn't need those riders anyway. Are all of our gods like this jackass?
Well, I think that's plenty from me for now, don't you?
He said, to which his audience erupted into cheering, though it was hard to tell if they were on his side or mine. Me? I was pretty much totally tired of his shtick already, and on top of that, I was hugely pissed at my grandpa, who'd lied his goddamn ass off to get me here. He was avoiding making any eye contact with me, despite hovering at my side. I figured even he didn't think we had much of a chance at this point, as we listened to the hooting of horns, the drumming of feet, and the gurgling of engines. As he was signing off, the Ghost King let slip a little truth to his tale, saying,
I have a few oil slicks up my sleeve, of course, but I reckon a few of you lot have some too, right?
As his cameras cut out and the televisions returned to static, I heard a voice right behind me tickle my ear.
Oh,
it said.
You better believe it, you little son of a bitch.
I spun on my heels because I did not like how close they'd gotten, but I saw no one who could harbor malice in such a softened voice, not amongst the cheering and bellowing racers. All of my fellow competitors began filing out elsewhere into the city, as though they'd been here 1,000 times before, whilst my grandpa and I just sorta stood there, lost and dumbfounded. Wheeled wackos sauntered about amongst them, offering pale nibbles and black drinks from marble platters, which floated at their sides like alien saucers. At their appearance, electronic music was pumped into Trash City, turning it into some kind of square-mile rave. A flashing menace of moon-white spotlights followed thematically. Then came another flittering of that empty confetti. As the entrance demon had foretold, revelry would come before the racing could start. I wasn't allowed a drink though, because all of the costumed freaks knew that I was underage without even asking me to prove it. I wouldn't have thought it was much of an issue somewhere so close to the afterlife, but there I was, able only to eat deviled eggs, whilst my already dead grandpa was somehow getting piss drunk with all his old warlock buddies. He seemed to be in good enough company, so I left him where he was for a bit and sought out some fresh air. I figured it wasn't likely he'd just go running off without telling me, but if he did happen to just mosey on along on his own, I wouldn't really mind so much. In fact, it might be best for both of us at this point if he just fucked off already. I was getting irritated. I guess, actually, I was getting cramped, which makes me antsy, what with all the shuffling and shimmying and the strange cries of, "Scream if you want to go faster!" echoing around Trash City. I asked for guidance from one of the skater ghosts, but they don't speak, not one word. I retraced my steps as best I could, knowing at least one staff member had spoken to me in English. But when the turnstiles were back in sight, it was quite clear that my sign-in demon had packed up and gone back home to hell. Made sense, given that it was just the roller spooks that were serving drinks. As far as I could see, there weren't any other supernatural creeps milling about with them. I could have just jumped the turnstiles. I mean, there weren't any guards of any kind, but it didn't seem smart to fight the power when the power in question was the actual devil himself, who had in fact confirmed the existence of hell for the first time in my natural-born lifespan. To be honest, I'm not much of a rule breaker anyway. I wanted to find some assistance, some kind of authority figure, but the only figure at all that I could find near the entrance arc was this one dude all wrapped up in a brown cloak with the brim of a baseball cap sticking out the front. He was wrapped up so goddamn tight that even when the spotlight splashed over him, I couldn't see a face or any features whatsoever. No identification, no badge, no welcoming sentence, just seemed to be whistling a tuneless symphony to nobody but himself. I took a leap of faith and asked him if he knew what the deal was with coming and going, and he told me, in sort of broken up sentences, that if I let him stamp my wrist, I could basically do what I wanted until the sun came up for dawn time.
Gods indoors. Magic,
he squawked.
Daybreak, daybreak.
Roger that, I told him, sticking out my right wrist for him. 10-4, whatever, stamp me up.
Other,
he cried.
other.
All right, I said, swapping my arms around for him. They do say that the devil himself was a southpaw, but whoever they were talking about wasn't some freak in a sheet. It was weird that it mattered, I figured. It was weirder still that when he pressed down on my flesh with his thumb, it burned like a hot plate. I recoiled with a yelp well before he could be totally finished, snatching my limb back and blowing on the throbbing flesh with as much breath as I could muster in between my cussing the stranger out. A sigil had been left in burnt skin. It almost resembled an emoji, just a plain face with crosses for eyes and an enormous tooth-bearing grin with another cross behind it for good measure. I looked back to him to complain, but the stranger was long, long gone, and I was alone once again. The Ghost King's welcoming bash lasted until the sun set on Trash City, and then it rolled on into the following day. I bided my time as best I could. There was no cell service in the desert, but I did make 50 levels of progress on a little puzzle game I'd installed on my phone until the battery ran dead. I had a look over my bike too. I couldn't do anything to fix the faults or fiddles, but I could, at the very least, wind up my flashlight in case we happened to be racing under the cover of another night. I thought about inspecting the competition, or cutting a brake line or two, but for one, I didn't want to get anybody actually hurt, and two, I wasn't sure that a lot of these vehicles had brake lines, given the odds and ends in front of me. There was one of literally everything, parked in the evenly spaced, equally divided million-spot lot. We were up against all sorts. Animals, futuristic technology, and flying clouds. Hell, there was even one of those old wooden trebuchets with the wheels, which surely was some kind of joke entry. I guessed, at the very least, it seemed like we wouldn't come anywhere near last place. But in my dad's own words, anything but first is last. He was a competitive eater, and he was very hard on himself. I heard the music cut out sometime after the full moon had gone to bed behind the clouds, but I didn't have any kind of precise time. I was half napping next to my bike, leaving an eye open on the lookout for the sun's rise. In next to a minute, everybody else who was alive was sleeping in the sand, and those that were dead looked to be faking it pretty convincingly. I spotted my grandpa snoozing beside a man dressed as a cowboy, wearing a straw version of a 10-gallon hat, curled up next to them both, and had a horribly vivid dream about becoming a pop star who had sold their soul for fortune and fame. I only woke up because my wrist was burning in the bright light of the baking sun, but when I did, I was really mad. We were the only racers still in Trash City. Somehow, we'd overslept, and not a single person thought to wake us up. I don't even know how it happened. I must have been so deep in that dream that I completely ignored the total lack of comfort. I couldn't give my grandpa the same excuse. He was suffering from the ethereal equivalent to a hangover, which made me even more mad, given that this was all his idea in the first place. I was drenched in my own sweat, soaking even the sand beneath me. Also, falling asleep had reset my sense of smell, so I was getting a solid noseful of the Trash City fumes. We left in a rush, hurrying to the now vacant parking lot where the initial stage of the race had been set out for us, seemingly overnight. Now, where hand-laid asphalt road had once led back to civilization, a brand new jerry-rigged construction of crumpled steel and corrugated mess pointed us deeper into the desert. It began at ground level, but rose up within a mile like a spaghetti junction, levitating above the earth itself, with absolutely no support structures beneath it. Had I not seen all I had seen yesterday, what with the devils and the ghosts, I wouldn't have put any trust in its architects. But I had little to no choice, did I? I had my grandpa wrap his ghoulish form around my top half like an incorporeal scarf, and hopped right onto my stupid little underspec'd moped. Kickstand up, engine on, and off we went, onto the garbage highway, towards the checkered flag starting line that I can see in the distance. A smooth surface was a surprise, considering the actual look of the road. It had been custom built for the racing experience, and felt as though we were being pulled along it by the sheer will of the spirit of drive itself. I passed the flag line at my top speed, which was too fast to read the yellow LED leaderboard situated a couple of seconds behind it, but I was fairly certain that everybody else had gotten a head start of several hours. Boy, I was really fuming. I was using words that I'd never dream of using against my last unliving family member. "You fucking asshole," I said to him to start. "You goddamn moron," I added. "Ugh, I wish you had died in that god-awful meteor strike," I continued, before stopping myself to hear what I'd actually said for a second, and rejigging it to say, "I wish we'd both died in that god-awful meteor strike, 'cause then you'd be stuck here on your own." I drove us for half an hour in total silence, but 22 miles in, it became pretty fucking clear that we'd never make good enough time to catch up. I even thought about turning us back around, but as the machined road dipped back down to the Earth's surface, turning into chevron sandstone slabs, I noticed a figure in the grand distance ahead. It was the shape of a man riding a horse. I recognized him right away. He stuck out like an alfalfa sprout because of the hat, a strange, straw version of the classic cowboy look, as I'd seen the night before. Only it wasn't him wearing it, it was his horse itself. And it looked great, actually. I pulled up alongside them both, slowing down to the beast's pace. A horse, as far as I remember, can go off at like 50 miles an hour, but I guess this one wasn't feeling it because they were cruising at a solid 18. I kept a little distance, in case the horse got spooked, and yelled at him. "Hey buddy," I said, "where's everyone else?" He didn't look up from the empty slab highway ahead. He just mumbled something along the lines of, "Somewhere around these parts, I reckon," all ominous like that. He had on the classic cowboy attire, but in a stylish all black, fit with fringed chaps over his woolen California-style pants, and a poncho right out of an Eastwood flick, detailed with little skulls along the far edge. Against all that, he wore thick-rimmed glasses with transitional lenses, and he was chewing licorice taffy instead of tobacco, though that didn't stop him from spitooning it out onto the hard road between sentences. Again, without looking at me, he said something else. "You ghosts know any magic, slicker? Mine don't. Reckon we're gonna need it when things come to pass." "Not a fan of how you speak," I told him over the hum of my engine. "Not your dialect, just like how spooky you bein'." I guess it was par for the particular course we were on though, a race between warlocks, or rather, the ghosts of warlocks, and whoever was dumb enough to enable them. That being said, I couldn't see a ghost attached to him at all, nor had I seen one near enough to him during his evening sleep. I kicked up the courage to ask him about it, but I wasn't much of a fan of his answer. "Well, I'd mind and you this were an accident of sorts," he began, with a slap to his animal's butt. "The ghost of my great-great-grandpartner's wild stallion, hair-trigger lone word, inhabits this here old county-down thoroughbred." I said, "You telling me there's a ghost horse in your horse?" After a moment of gear whirring, I added, "And that ghost horse was a warlock? And the Ghost King invited him here?" "Mm-hmm," he said, spitting out a nugget of taffy that didn't agree with him into the dust below. "And," I said, "how the hell did that happen?" He thought about that for a moment, putting another slip of pink candy between his gums as though it had medicinal benefits. As if it was some great secret, he finally turned to my direction and said, "Probably just asked nicely." I had neither the energy or the time to argue with him and his nutso goth cowboy logic. Before my very eyes, without any warning, the whole world around me seemed to quick turn on its axis. My consciousness was tossed from my body, as if from the hands of an adept quarterback. For a moment, the earth itself eclipsed the sun, and the dunes collided with the clouds in some fine explosion. It was no time for the night to show its face, for we'd only been riding the mid-morning shine for an hour at best. To fight off my body's intense demand to vomit itself inside out, I had to shut my eyes tight and just hope for the best. I couldn't have been out for too long. My stomach stopped screaming just as the planet came to a halt, and then my eyes opened up wide to surroundings which once again matched the no tone of Trash City. The Mojave was not white, it lacked color entirely. Beautiful blue skies and golden sunshine all along the way had been replaced by a clear atmosphere of faint indigo, and the visage of a crescent moon, which in no way matched the phase I saw mere hours ago. It had teeth, the moon, at least from where I was laying, and it was encircled by a halo of impeccable brightness, which lit the world below, as well as daylight might. In its glow, I could see the bodies of 100 other races, strewn across the ashy sand. "Still alive there, Slicker?" asked the monotonous cowboy, who now matched the theme of the locale so well it seemed he might have played a part in it. A stream of blood was running down his face, though it was ink black and not red. In fact, all that had retained its color in the transition was my grandpa's ghost, still a mossy shade of sickly green. Even I, Burt Rubber, had become a comic book appropriate melding of black and white. I was unhurt, unlike him, though a bit shaken from my tumble. Passing out had made me all loose and rubbery, like how the intoxicated tend to survive crashes more often. "I don't like the look of all this myself," said the cowboy, "especially not them there skeletons." I'd not clocked them, but he pointed at what he was referring to. 2 barren, picked flesh corpses off to the moonside horizon, which he aptly described as being part whale, part Zilla. True monsters, the kind from old Japanese flicks. Long dead, obviously, but being above ground meant that there could be more of them lurking in this uncharted realm. "Where are we?" I asked him. Half thinking he wouldn't be able to answer that question, I asked another double-barreled style. "How come we survived that, and they didn't?" "We are privy here to what's known as the Underdesert," he told me. "Warlock hell. And, by the looks of it, we're at the very edge." He tapped me on the shoulder, chucking my attention to the south, where stood a vast wall of impenetrable darkness, which I didn't dare touch in case I slipped through and fell infinite, unthinkable depths. "As for our friends here," he continued, "I'm quick to reckon it's got something to do with the Chasers. Now, you were getting your winks in at the time, but right before the race began, the Ghost King regaled us with a heaping list of folks under that designation. I forget 'em all. He went on for quite a while, but they're the oil slick he mentioned right before the party. They're an obstacle. Supposed to be on our tail, but we've arrived a little late for that. Probably a few clicks ahead of us at this point." I wanted to wring my grandpa by his transparent throat and throttle him into a state of second death. There was, frankly, no way that all of this was news to him, and he was being awful quiet about it. Moreover, in the transition, my bike had been written off without a hope of repair. It had taken an entire pit crew to get it back in working order. Hell, one of the wheels was literally missing. Unable to help, the cowboy slipped himself back onto his horse, which now, inexplicably, had 6 legs instead of 4. "Pleasure meeting you, friend, but this ain't no tag team, and I ain't itching to get caught," he said, hi-ho silvering away from me at breakneck speed. "If you ever find yourself back on the trail, 2 heads are better than 1. And then he did a yee-haw for good measure. "Thanks," I yelled back at him. "You chaps-wearing asshole." I turned my fury to my grandpa, who was floating silently amongst the many pieces of my work ride. "Well?" I asked, finding it impossible to bite my tongue now. "What about you? Can you pull another bike out of your wizarding asshole, or are you as useless as you are silent?" I watched him shrug his ghastly little shoulders, and then he sucked himself into the machine. His voice echoed out of the exhaust pipe. He told me, as the whole thing kick-started into gear and the engine began to rumble. An eerie glow shot out from all of the cracks in the plastic, and the bike rolled itself back into position, scratching its limp chassis against the road slabs. Minor bits and pieces of plastic and metal came flying from beneath the white dunes, returning to wherever they'd broken off. Grandpa was holding them in place with his Halloweeny luminescence. That said, the wheel did not surface. Eventually, Grandpa came back out, allowing all the fixes to fall right apart once more.
"Never mind. It's too much,"
he said, after the bike had tipped back over in his wake.
"Takes all my energy
So we're fucked, I said. Fucked and stuck in actual hell. Because what? You wanted to come back to life? For what purpose? What difference is being alive and being a ghost anyway? It sounds great, actually, being all transparent and shit.
It's better than this,
he told me.
I'm sorry, but... Sorry won't get you home, will it?
Came a calm voice with some backbone, like a whisper on a gale-force wind. I recognized it immediately from Trash City. It was the voice with no form. It set the stamp on my left wrist on fire, literal crackles and bright red flames, washing the whole area in a foreign hue. It felt as though I'd dipped my whole arm in battery acid. Not even burying it in the sand could quell the demonic embers. A plume of white smoke jettisoned from the stamp up into the air, then its wider end jerked and arced down to the ground again. From it appeared the clothed figure who had given it to me in the first place. His apparition caused the searing to cease entirely, and with it went the stamp itself.
But I can help with that,
he said, filling me with a definite sense of doom. His hooded head pulled backwards with an audible snapping, and from the gap where his face should have been burst forth two semi-transparent pale blue arms twice as long as my own, each equipped with inch-long fingernails serrated like steak knives. Bending at the wrong angle from the elbow, he grabbed the wrap he wore and pulled it down his body, unveiling his form from tip to toe. Beneath his baseball cap, decorating his forehead, were 4 nub-like horns, and he had eyes the color of solid gold. 2 fangs stuck out from his bottom lip, but it had no effect on his voice at all. He looked a little like one of the Ghost King's demonic staff members, but unlike them, he had this strange halo of black energy hovering behind the back of his head like a high beam. At his command, the cloak shrunk down and turned into a kind of kilt, leaving his blue chest bare and his dad bod on show. Tattooed across his heart was the same sigil that he'd stamped on me, a smiling face with X's for eyes. In his wake, he left footprints of fire, and yet the strangest thing about him was that he was in full color, at odds with the Underdesert itself. He stretched himself out like a bodybuilder prepping to lift.
It is good to be out of that thing, let me tell you,
he said, stretching out his right hand to shake.
I am Cuthrail, the saint of deals, bargains and pacts. I am the herald of decent outcomes, the prince of the golden opportunity, and boy oh boy, do I have one for you, little man.
Decent outcomes, I said, shaking his warm hand twice.
Do all gods in this world introduce them in keeping with the rule of thirds?
Asked my grandpa.
And don't call him little man.
His face betrayed his confident jab, and his coming to my defense was pretty telling. If he did not know who stood before us, he certainly knew what. I had no idea myself, but then I did come into this situation with no knowledge of gods, or saints, or princes of any kind, let alone dead ones. Cuthrail did not acknowledge my grandpa. It was as if he was a mosquito buzzing around a cow's behind.
First things first, I am sorry about burning you up like that,
he said, scratching at the back of his bald head with his nails.
It was the only way to get down here as I am. I'm not in peak condition, as you might be able to tell.
Then he stuck one of his arms through his own incorporeal stomach, turned around, and waved it at me. It looked, the way things were going, that the more powerful somebody was, the less serious they seemed to take themselves.
Not a ghost, like your pops there, just not complete.
My grandpa stuck himself between the two of us, arms spread full wingspan like he was sacrificing himself in the heart of battle. And it annoyed me. His sudden, false-caring attitude filled me with ice-cold spite.
What do you want with my grandson?
He asked, though Cuthrail took little note of his decisiveness. He was no challenge for whatever this saint truly was. He reached over his head, picking the ghost up with just 2 clawed fingers like he was a pair of dirty pants, and put him off to the side of us. I could see in Grandpa's face that he wanted to say something, but it clearly wasn't worth irking a capital G god, as he'd put it. Unhurt, but embarrassed, Grandpa Frank crossed his arms and shut his mouth.
I'm looking to make a deal, if you can believe it. The Ghostking of Speed is too powerful for his own good, and it's partly my fault.
He snapped his fingers, summoning to his free hand a clipboard with another thick stack of paper attached to it.
Plus, he ate my brother.
I ignored that for the time being and started reading through the document he gave me. Lots of big words, more mumbo-jumbo than I could stomach, personally, and that was intentional. Not to judge a book by its cover, but he did look like a devil, after all. Wait, I said, spotting something interesting there. You want to join the race? Cathriel was picking his nose with his pinky in the meantime, but he didn't take it out to respond. He said, digging deeper,
Well, no, I don't want to do anything of the sort, but I gotta do it. I can't take him on my own, not in this state. Hell, not in any state now. I'm willing to join the race in your grandpa's stead, and in return, I want one thing. I want you to give me the wish.
I snorted at him. You don't really think I can win this, do you? I mean, just look at my bike. He flicked whatever saintly mucus had gathered beneath his nail in my grandpa's general direction.
Yeah, with me you could for sure. Why not?
So confident. He really won me over with that lackadaisical attitude, even if it smelled of a ruse. He seemed cool, and in this crazy race, that's all that seemed to matter. That nameless cowboy had a ghost horse on his team, for crying out loud. Plus there were all those whack of vehicles too. It had to count for something, right? Who could turn down that kind of opportunity? In that moment, I had already decided that I would partner with him. I just had one question. What about him? I said, pointing to my grandpa. Can you get him out of hell?
No,
Said the saint.
well, not right now, anyway. It was hard enough getting into hell.
Now listen here.
Said the old man.
You're not just gonna leave me here, are you, Burt? You've just met this man. You don't know what he's up to.
Which I thought sounded a little hypocritical. He wasn't helping his case, anyway. Cathriel cleared his throat, put his hand on his heart, and said,
This so-called Ghost King isn't the truest ruler of hell. Originally, he was just a mortal man. We're coming to the end of the episode now, so I'll make this quick as I can. But basically, I got swindled out of half my power. He sought me out and managed to finagle his bargain into a contest of speed. Usually, when a pact is made, I give you something, and you give me something, and eventually, we part ways, having both gotten what we wanted.
Hey, don't ignore me.
I got cocky and overconfident, and I let it all happen. Obviously, I lost and had to give the Ghost King half of my power. Now, I'm not the saint I used to be. Can't spread my vibe just as well as I'd like. Can only make deals that I can physically see to completion with what I have to hand. I got just enough juice to help you out.
Selfish.
shouted Grandpa Frank.
Selfish demon. Don't you dare steal my grandson.
Cathriel snapped his fingers once more, and the old man's mouth disappeared, showing he was still plenty powerful compared to either of us.
Shut up, will ya?
He said.
That's not the only reason I want to take the Ghost King down a peg, though.
Yeah, what was that you said about your brother? I asked. I do remember the Ghost King calling himself the, Saint Eater,
Bingo!
said Cathriel.
See, that mortal turned out to be a warlock. So, like poor old Pops over here, he sold his soul to my brother, the old Devil King.
He added air quotes over brother, but opted not to explain it.
Just having my power wouldn't stop him from coming to collect, though.
So, Satan was a saint? I asked. Saint-tan?
Good joke, but he didn't go by that name. Could be a different guy entirely. I knew him as Uffern, and this hell was by his design. I don't know exactly what happened after our race, but the Ghost King managed to absorb him in his entirety, and now they're one and the same. If they weren't, this place wouldn't exist. That's a big no-no.
He continued.
Saints are born out of belief. We're like concepts. You can't be messing with the natural order like that. Reality ain't a fan. Plus, he's my brother. I want to know if I can bring him back.
He added.
Otherwise, this place needs to go.
That's where I come in, huh? I said. I get it, but you didn't answer my question.
Pops made this decision himself,
said the saint. He knew he was selling his soul to the Devil King, and he knew that that would mean spending eternity in hell. It's only the fact that Uffern's not at his post that it took this long to happen, understand? Normally, a big hand comes out of the ground and pulls you down. Really though, it's not that bad. You see any rivers of lava or torture devices? It's just another afterlife.
Cathriel's speech made some kind of sense, but it did nothing for the anxious look on my grandpa's face.
Also, didn't he die at 112 years old? I'd say that's a long enough life, wouldn't you? Oh, fine. What do you say, old man? When I'm back to 100%, I'll be willing to make a deal with you. For a price.
I answered for him. Alright, I said. Done deal. Cathriel blinked.
Really? Just like that? Usually it takes a bit of convincing. Sometimes I even have to break out a musical number.
I shrugged at him. I don't want to be here. This was all my grandpa's idea, and he kept most of the details to himself. Now my bike's fucked, and I'm stuck in some godforsaken race hell. So yeah, I'm pretty willing to get out of here by any means necessary. I flicked over to the last page of the contract without reading the rest, and stamped my thumbprint on the dotted line as instructed. Upon completion, Cathriel snapped his fingers again, and it burned up in front of me. For whatever reason, I felt the heat on my face, but not in my hands. So what are you going to do about my bike situation?
Hop on and find out,
said the saint. I did as he told me, with Grandpa watching from the sidelines. He gestured wild shapes to get me to reconsider, but I figured a fair enough point had already been made. If he wasn't going to suffer the biblical hell I'd been taught in school, his time down here would be more like being put on the naughty step. Cathriel seemed confident enough. Once we win, he can make his own deal. Until then, in the saint's own words, shut up. I held the moped under my legs, leaning all of its weight onto the one remaining wheel. Cathriel transformed himself into a fine blue mist, which crackled with the red embers of a dying campfire, and sucked himself into the machine, as my grandpa had done before him. Only, instead of a rumbling, a coughing, and a spluttering, the vehicle exploded beneath me in a flash of black light. It caused no pain, but I definitely felt a tingling in my thighs as a new blue bike apparated in its place. It roared with a full tank, a souped-up, fully fledged beast of a chopper, seemingly crossed with some kind of rocket ship. It had a long leather seat, silver handlebars which sat at shoulder height, and even a functional headlamp in the shape of a skull, which I found gaudy but so incredibly effective, piercing even the depths of hell itself. I revved the engine and turned back to say something to my grandpa. I didn't have anything in mind. I was just kinda hoping something would come out when the time came. I didn't get the chance though. Twisting the grip was all the signal Cathriel needed to kick into first gear, and the bike took off like a fighter jet. I barely needed to control it at all. We burned past the corners and the hairpin turns and the serpentine landscape with such ease that I could hardly keep my eyes open. If this were my work vehicle, we would never have needed to extend the 30 minutes or it's free, guaranteed to about an hour or two, that's for sure. The speedometer almost cracked under the pressure as we screeched past the smear of the goth cowboy at 1.5 million miles an hour, cutting ahead of even one or two other shadows that I had no time to recognize at all. It was hard to judge exactly how long this race would be, but it would certainly take multiple days off my life. We powered through the first checkpoint and all the way to the second set of checkered flags in just under half an hour. In his current form, the Saint could only manage such an output for a brief period of time, and he wouldn't be able to do it again until tomorrow. I had to get off anyway. I'd begun to feel a little motion sick, and I was certain that my bones had been ground into jelly by the G-forces. I had to sit for 5 minutes, just for the feeling to come back to my legs. Camped at the end of the second stage were 3 other survivors of the transition, all of which had blank stares and nothing to say to each other. One of them had been driving the Love Bug, and it was now full of dents and no longer had a windshield. They'd all taken a tumble, it seemed, but their full-sized motors seemed to handle it a little better. To avoid suspicion of cheating, Cathriel remained on the inside of the bike, though he began snoring almost immediately after I'd gotten off. I sat myself down in front of the decorative stack of CRT televisions, which displayed bubbling static just like the ones in Trash City. I let my eyes close and woke up only when 2 of the 3 racers decided to up sticks and make an attempt to catch up to whoever was in first place. I decided against joining them, admittedly out of overconfidence, which is what got Cathriel into hot water in the first place, but I figured as long as I could still hear him snoring, we were still good to wait. I wasn't gonna lose now, not with speed like that in the tank. After another little while, The televisions let out the sound of a war horn, and the Ghost King's visage took center stage on each one once again.
And with that, our last competitor has made it to the end of stage 1. He's on a pony, of all things. No wonder it took so long, eh? Andre Snood is in the lead currently, driving a whopping 1,500 horsepower, and this guy's come all this way on just one.
Man, I hated his stupid laugh.
Just want to give a big shout out to all our chasers this evening, especially the following: the Trash City Roller Boys, the Melon Baller, Exporty Spice, James Mackerel Boy, Axel Prose, Egg Morbo, the Onion Eater, Chint, and Macchiato, the sequel. Thank you all for your hard work gathering up all the ghosts of the losers. I really, really appreciate it. A lovely round 33.3% of all competitors have bitten the dust. There's a couple resting at stage 1, a handful at the second, and the rest of them are still on the move. Look at them go! What troopers,
said the Ghost King.
Dunno about you lot, but I am simply having a wonderful racing time. Only one slight little teeny-weeny wriggling problem. It seems that somebody is cheating.
All the blood rushed right to my face, so quickly that I felt like I was going to pop. I tried to hide from the other racer, dipping lower against my bike. He couldn't take his eyes off the television anyway. He must have been tired. I'd not seen him blink once.
Seems like somebody's gone and swapped their ghost for someone. No, something else. Are you listening to me, Mr. Burt Rubber? I can see you there, trying to look away. I know what you've done, buddy.
He paused for a while to let me sweat.
Well, I guess there's no cheating in this race since there's no rules. It's certainly in the spirit of things. Oh, you're not in trouble. Well, not really, but I do think that some of the other racers might find the upgrades you've had to be a little unfair. So how about we level out the playing field a little bit? What do you say to a bounty, eh?
A horrid chorus of cheers came from the creatures in the Ghost King's employ, an unseen audience jeering in agreement.
Racers! From this point onwards, if you take Burt Rubber and his new friend off the road, they'll knock a whole 2 hours off your final time. 2.5 if you make it real showy. Huh. How about that? And chasers? Well, let's just say you won't need to work another day in your life.
The last remaining racer at stage 2 turned his head away from the television, gaping his 1,000-yard stare in my direction, looking either past me or right through my skeleton. Had he been in color, his eyes would have been bloodshot red. I wasn't sure how I'd defend myself against his enormous, muscular body. I mean, he had fists like Christmas hams and a belt made of barbed wire, which I'm sure he wasn't too proud to use in a fight. He cocked his head at me, cracking his neck as he did it, and asked, "Who the hell is Burt Rubber?" You have been listening to 1.5 million miles an hour, an episode of Pulp, Surreal Stories from a Nearby Skull, written and directed by Jake Lucy. This production is copyright 2021 by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency and is intended for enjoyment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. If you like this show, you might like chucking me a buck on patreon.com/sbda. Please visit us online at sleepybones.agency. That's sleepybones.agency for more surreal stories.